The first scary story. I never thought this could happen. It all started when my sister gave me a weird video game for my birthday. This game was called Eternal Descent and was something completely different from anything I had ever played. As soon as I inserted the disc into the console, the game world came to life before my eyes. The graphics were stunning, and the sounds made me feel every creaking door and rustling of dark corners. I was absorbed by this atmosphere from the first minutes. The first mission was strange. I needed to explore an abandoned mansion that was full of various mysteries and traps. I walked through a few rooms solving puzzles, and everything seemed like game mechanics. However, when I entered the mansion's bedroom, something changed. The bed was torn up and blood was smeared on the walls. I heard a whisper and saw a shadow disappear into the darkness. It was weird, but I figured it was part of the game. The next few missions were even stranger. I started seeing things in the game that weren't supposed to be there. In the depths of one forest, there was an ancient lighthouse that made me stop. Then, while walking through a rundown industrial complex, I heard high-pitched screams and moans that seemed completely real. I couldn't understand what was happening. This game has become too real. I probably plunged into this too deeply, and with each new mission, the boundary between reality and the virtual world began to blur. Now, I can't be sure where the game ends and where real life begins. All I know is that I found myself in this nightmare, and I can't convince myself that this is just a game. The nights became the most terrible moment. When I turned off the console and tried to return to reality, the dark scenes from the game remained in my nightmares. I saw a shadow following me and voices whispering cryptic messages. At some point, inside the game and reality began to intertwine. I began to notice changes in my environment that were similar to places in the game. Opening the door to my room, I found myself in an abandoned mansion, exactly the same as in Eternal Descent. I heard crunching footsteps and a whisper was heard somewhere in the distance. I realized that my life was under threat, and this was not just a game. She went beyond the virtual world and entered my reality. Now I must explore this nightmare and uncover its secrets in order to return to the world I know. This story has become my own scary game, and I can't say for sure how it will end. Second story. It was a cold autumn evening when I heard that first signal. It was like nothing I had ever heard, a mysterious and melodic pulsing coming from my radio. At first glance, this might seem like a glitch in the transmission, but the tone and rhythm of the signal seemed to be something much more complex and intriguing. I started recording these signals every day and every night, unable to tear myself away from them. My notes quickly filled with unusual graphic images that seemed to be symbols of an unknown language. Strangely, they began to appear in my dreams, and I felt that they were telling me something. Every day the signals became more complex and melodic, like a melody from another world. I felt that there was some kind of connection between me and the source of this message, and it became more and more intrusive. One day, while listening to a signal, it began to change and soared to a new level. My ears were filled with something more than music. It was an exceptional symphony in which every note seemed to speaking to me personally. This music had a purpose hidden in the melody, and I couldn't understand it. Signals began to remind me of a meeting of great power awaiting me somewhere in space. I felt them sink into my essence, leaving behind strange sensations and visions. The closer I came to understanding the meaning of this supernatural connection, the more deeply I plunged into the darkness of unknown depths. I could not understand what these mysterious signals were calling me to, and what awaited me in this mystical contact with alien civilizations. Fear and curiosity mixed inside me, creating an ominous atmosphere of anticipation that only grew with each new signal. What happens next? I don't know, but I'm ready to move on into this amazing world of secrets and mysteries that these mystical signals from space present to me. With each new signal, contact with alien civilizations became more mysterious and intriguing. I began to lose track of time because the signals seemed to have no end. They penetrated my dreams and intertwined with my real perceptions. One of the signals presented me with visions of incredible worlds, places where physical laws seemed independent of those we know. I felt simultaneously connected to these worlds and at the same time disconnected from reality. Time was losing its meaning, and the boundaries between reality and myth were becoming increasingly blurred. One day, when the signals became especially strong, I felt a strange effect on my physical being. My skin sparkled with an unknown light, and I felt my thoughts radiate out into the universe like magnetic waves. What awaits me in this mystical connection with alien civilizations? I don't have the answers yet, and my writing and research continue to lead me to an infinite number of questions. My dreams became increasingly strange, full of symbols and messages that now serve as my keys to this mysterious contact. And so I continue to listen to these mysterious signals from space, ready to pass through the gate into an unknown world of secrets and alien civilizations. My life has changed forever, and I don't know what horrors or miracles may lie ahead. Third story. It was already dusk when I entered the old orphanage, covered with cobwebs and oblivion. The light blue windows looked like restless eyes watching me at every step. The door creaked as I stepped inside, and I was instantly enveloped in a gloomy atmosphere, as if the building itself was breathing the past. I was holding in my hands an old cassette tape that I found in a dusty closet in the attic. It had been forgotten all these years, but the mysterious title on the cover, Secrets of the Orphanage, made me explore this place. My flashlight cast a restless light on the gloomy walls and forgotten toys that seemed alive in their solitude. The old recording machine on which the secrets were supposed to be recorded lay in the corner, as if someone had left it there recently. I inserted the tape and pressed play. At first, the sound was distorted and indistinct, but as it played, children's voices began to appear. The children were talking about something scary, about something that frightened them in this house. "He's watching us," the children whispered, and I couldn't understand who they meant. The sounds of footsteps and gentle cries mixed with the recording, creating an atmosphere of absolute horror. I heard each child's name, and each name seemed to come from afar. Suddenly, I felt a breath on my shoulder, as if someone was nearby. I turned around, but there was no one in the darkness. This house seemed to have a will of its own, living in the past, and he did not want its secrets to become known. The tape continued to play its terrible recordings, and the children seemed to be out of time. They whispered about the terrible events that happened here and how they could not leave. What happened in this orphanage? What secrets does his dark past hide? I felt that I had just begun to uncover a sinister story, and that more horrors and secrets awaited me deeper into this dark place. The children continued to whisper about their fears and anguish on the recording. Their voices became increasingly distorted and sinister, as if something evil had come inside them. I listened to them talk about the price paid for their knowledge, and about something they called the orphanage oath. The gloomy atmosphere of this place squeezed my heart. I felt that the children recorded on this tape were looking at me through a time portal and were waiting for me to find out the truth. Their call was clear, but its meaning remained obscure. As the recording drew to a close, I heard the last words spoken by an older boy. He said they have to stop this or children will continue to disappear. Darkness and silence engulfed the room as the recording ended. I was left alone with these secrets and horrors of the past. But what did its completion mean? Who disappeared, and what happened to the children of this house? All this remained a mystery that I had to solve. I felt that this orphanage was hiding a lot, and now it carried my own secret. What lies ahead for me? I was determined to find out what happened to these children and why they contacted me through this ancient tape. This story is just beginning, and the horrors of the orphanage have not yet been revealed. Fourth story. I was always afraid to return to this abandoned school, but curiosity overcame fear. The ancient building, covered with moss and a long-forgotten time, looked like a ghost of the past. What awaited me inside was much more terrible. The door creaked as I stepped inside, and the sound pierced my ears, as if the school itself sighed, coming to life in my presence. I couldn't help but notice children's drawings on the walls, as if the souls of children had left their mark on forgotten bricks. The empty classrooms were filled with silence, but I felt like I wasn't alone. The laughter of children was heard in the distance, unusual and alarming. The voices seemed ghostly, and I began to wonder where they were coming from. I was moving deeper inside the school when I came across an old playground. The swing creaked and swayed, as if someone was playing there, but invisible hands. It seemed to me that I saw the ghosts of children who do not want to leave, who are still attached to this place. Then I heard a child's voice calling to me. "Help us," he said. I couldn't see anyone, but the voice sounded so insistent that I was overcome with a feeling of anxiety. What did these kids want from me? Why couldn't they leave this place? As I continued to explore the school, I came across notes hidden in forgotten drawers. They talked about strange happenings and disappearances of children in this school, something that happened many years ago. The further I moved, the stronger the atmosphere of fear and mystery became. The children who didn't leave left their mark on this forgotten school, and they wanted their story to be told. What happened to these children? Why couldn't they leave this place? These questions were tempting, but the answers were probably as terrible as the events themselves. The mystery of this old school was deeper than I could have imagined, and I felt that it was just beginning to be revealed. My whole soul demanded to solve this dark mystery, despite all the warnings and the feeling of impending danger. I felt that the children who remained in this abandoned school wanted their story to be heard, but my actions began to lose logic and rationality. Along the corridors, I heard footsteps that followed me. Shadows hid in the corners, and I saw flickering figures of children in the windows, but they disappeared as soon as I tried to get closer. This school seemed haunted, and they didn't want me to figure out their secret. The tracks lead me to an old basement, which I decide to risk exploring. There, in the darkness, I discovered forgotten cages in which, it seemed, children spent their time. The walls were covered with scratched messages and symbols that looked like calls. The further I moved deeper into the basement, the clearer it became that terrible events had happened in this place. The mysterious recordings and sounds I heard told me that this place had witnessed something unexplained. When I finally came to the surface, I realized that I had become part of this dark story, that the school would not let me go so easily. The children who did not leave are waiting for answers to their questions, and I feel that my journey has only just begun in this forgotten school. What happened to these children? Why couldn't they leave this place? And what terrible secret is hidden within the walls of this old school? The answers, I feel, may be as terrible as the mystery itself. Fifth story. In the bosom of the night, I drove onto a deserted road, woven from darkness and lonely moments. All that existed around me were only horizons of darkness and sparkling stars in the sky. The shadows of trees floated everywhere, creating ghostly shapes and giving the place a heartbreaking atmosphere. The car slowly pulled up to a gas station, which stood alone in this unforgiving landscape. The light above the instrument panel began to blink. There were only a few kilometers left to the same distant city. Fuel was needed, and I stopped. The whirlwind of wind carried with it gloomy rustles and the crackling of abandoned trees. The gas station looked forgotten and abandoned, as if it existed outside of time. The lantern above the speakers had long since lost its brightness, but that didn't stop me from seeing a figure standing in the distance. For a moment, it seemed like an ordinary traveler waiting for gas, but its outline was illegible, as if it were made of smoke and shadow. I thought it was just an illusion, a reflection of my fatigue after a long journey. But when I started refueling the car, he didn't leave. The engine finished refueling, but I still felt the gaze of this figure through the rearview mirror, as if its eyes were piercing my soul. Confusedly looking to the side, I saw her, but she was already closer. Her face remained in shadow, but her eyes were bright points of light, as if they were lighting up with a fire that was not at all human. The fear emanating from her gripped me like an icy wave. I returned to the car, But the moment the key turned in the ignition, the figure was already in my back. I felt her cold breath and heard a whisper that burst into my thoughts. Now I knew that something was very wrong, but what exactly remained a mystery. What happened at this gas station? What kind of creature was in my car? All these remained questions to which I could not find answers. I decided not to write further because the mystery of that night remained unsolved. I pressed myself against the seat, clutching the steering wheel in my hands, and tried to calm my rapidly beating pulse. The figure in my car kept looking at me with its glowing eyes, as if trying to say something. Suddenly, she began to whisper something unintelligible to me, as if outside of time and space. Her voice was cold and monotonous, and it penetrated into the deepest gorge of my soul. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt that they were warnings, some kind of ominous predictions. My car was locked, and the doors wouldn't budge when I tried to open them. I was trapped, and the unknown creature in my back was getting closer, shining its eyes brighter, as if it was trying to penetrate my soul. The moments dragged on like an eternity, and I felt that I had become part of something mystical and terrible. The creature could not be from this world, and its intentions remained a mystery. Just as I began to give in from horror and powerlessness, suddenly the figure disappeared, as if it had disappeared into the night. My car was unlocked, and I could move again. I turned on the engine and accelerated, leaving the gas station. The stars in the sky no longer sparkled, but only motionlessly watched my leaving car. What was this creature, and why did it decide to let me go? The mystery of that night remained unsolved, but I felt that it left something sinister and unknown in my soul. Sixth story. My fear of clowns has always been deep-seated. These mixed faces and strange outfits always seemed scary to me. But when I heard the legends of the abandoned circus of horrors and its mysteries, my shark of fear began to swim in the endless oceans of horror. The abandoned circus stood in severe oblivion, as if its soul had left with the main performances many years ago. Tight ropes, covered in dust and dirt, hung from the ceiling like dead snakes. Such performances will not be repeated. When I tried to explore the room, I found that many of the doors were locked, and there were padlocks hanging on them, as if someone did not want the world to have access to this dark corner. But I was persistent, and this was my first and last experience. There were traces of makeup in the mirrors, as if the clowns had recently been preparing for their performances. Coats, caps, and paints lay in an indecipherable disorder, like the remains of a bygone era. I picked up one of the suits and noticed strange traces of fading paint on the fabric. Through the darkness I heard shuffling, like footsteps somewhere in the distance, but the place seemed empty, and I began to wonder where the sound was coming from. Maybe someone was here with me, or worse, something else. As I moved deeper into the circus, the atmosphere became more and more terrifying. Shadows from the corners jumped around me like clowns, playing their dark game. It was as if I was in another world where the laws of physics no longer applied. I heard whispers and laughter that sounded like distorted voices. These clowns were no ordinary ones. They were something else that lurks in our nightmares and comes when the night turns pitch black. What kind of entities came to life in this circus of horrors? How did they remain in this world after the performances closed? It all remained a mystery, but I knew that a night in an abandoned circus of horrors would leave a mark on me forever. Like the clowns, I began to lose my mental stability. The place became more and more of a cosmic nightmare, and I began to doubt the reality of what was happening. Every rustle, every laugh seemed to penetrate my soul, destroying my psyche. The light from the lanterns illuminated the room unevenly, creating long, distorted shadows, as if clowns were watching me from the darkness. Their laughter grew louder and shriller, and it seemed to intensify, becoming an agony to my ears. I moved forward, trying to find a way out of this nightmare, but every door I ran into remained locked. Suddenly, the laughter died down and I stopped, feeling that I was not alone. The figure of a clown towered in front of me. His face was hidden under a bright mask, but his eyes glowed brightly, like two fiery points. He had a knife in his hands and seemed ready for action. The clown slowly approached me. His laughter became more and more hysterical and frightening. I realized that I was trapped and had no way out. The knife in his hands was ready to take my life, and I was helpless in the face of this nightmare. What happened in this circus of horrors? How did it become a place of nightmares and horrors? My thoughts became blurry, and I didn't know how to survive in this living, hellish merry-go-round. The seventh story about mysterious disappearances in the mountains. Mountains always attract me with their mystery and beauty, but what happened in that secluded corner of the mountainous area changed my perception forever. The expedition was conceived as a study of nature and a search for unknown species of animals. We were prepared for long days of hiking, sleepless nights, and unpredictable weather. But nothing could have prepared us for what we faced. The first days passed without any special events. We set up camp in a cozy clearing and began placing cameras to monitor wild animals. At night, in the snowy forests, I heard rustling and rustling sounds, but we took them for nocturnal inhabitants, not suspecting that something else was making its way through the trees. It all started on the third night. The sound was not something else. It penetrated into our dreams. It was a grinding sound, like claws sliding through trees. I left the tent, believing it was a bear or some other large animal. But before my eyes, there was a figure that did not look like an animal at all. It was a creature, tall and distorted, as if it were made of darkness and fog. It moved easily and silently, its ominous eyes sparkling in the darkness. I could not see his face, but I felt that it was looking at me, knowing for sure that I could see it. My heart was pounding wildly, and I ordered myself to remain still. The creature slowly moved closer, and its presence made me feel like prey in front of a predator. I couldn't move, as if I was petrified with fear, and suddenly it disappeared, as if it had disappeared into thin air. I returned to the tent, but could not sleep. All the nights spent in these mountains were one nightmare of insomnia. I heard his external steps, grinding and noise, and felt that he was always nearby. Friends and colleagues thought I was crazy, but I knew I had seen something incredible. I could never find an explanation for this creature, and it remained a mystery of the mountains. Since then, I no longer go to the mountains. I'm afraid that it may return, that those grinding and rustling noises may be closer again, and I will not be able to leave. The mountains are no longer a place of adventure for me. They have become a place of nightmares and mysteries that will forever remain unsolved. Several years have passed since I survived that terrible night in the mountains. The experience with the mysterious creature remains in my memory as one of the most amazing and frightening moments of my life. But, as I soon learned, this was just the beginning. After our expedition, I couldn't let go of the thought of the creature I saw. I have spent countless hours researching the stories and legends of the mountains, but nowhere have I found any mention of such creatures. No one who was in these places reported such encounters. The more I explored, the more convinced I became that this creature was not from this world. It was something supernatural that defied explanation. I had to make the decision to return to these mountains to find answers. My next expedition was well prepared. We brought with us advanced monitoring and recording equipment, as well as a team of researchers ready for any challenge. But despite this, the nights in these mountains again began to resemble a nightmare. Again, I heard a grinding sound and saw a ghostly creature, but this time it was more active, more aggressive. It began to come closer to the camp, leaving strange symbols and signs on the trees. Every noise of the night filled me with anxiety, and I could not sleep. We began recording these events, collecting all the data we could. But the more we learned, the less we understood. The existence of this creature was contrary to all the laws of nature, and no modern technology could unravel its secrets. One of our team members disappeared during the night shift. We combed the mountains up and down, but found no trace of him. He simply disappeared, as if the darkness of the night had swallowed him up. Every day the situation became more and more dangerous, and we decided to leave these mountains. Our records and data did not give us answers, but only deepened the mystery. The mysterious creature remained unknown. Eighth story. Over the years, I have collected research on UFOs and their connection to flying object cemeteries. My passion began after an incident that turned my life upside down and made me imbued with this mystical topic. It all started one clear summer evening when my friends and I decided to go for a walk to the nearest cemetery. We laughed and joked, not suspecting that something unimaginable awaited us ahead. While we were wandering through the graves, I suddenly saw a strange light above us. It was something bright and slowly moving in the sky, leaving a luminous trail behind it. I felt my stomach twist with unknown anxiety. My friends also noticed this phenomenon and began making humorous remarks about aliens and extraterrestrials. But as the light approached, it changed direction and quickly fell to the ground with noise and crackling. We rushed to the crash site and found fire and black debris that looked completely different from anything we had ever seen. My camera was always with me, and I began to record every detail of this event. But when we approached a large piece of debris, I heard a strange noise, as if something was moving inside. We carefully began to disassemble it, and inside we found a small metal object that sparkled with an unnaturally bright light. This small object was covered in unfamiliar symbols, and it seemed to emit heat. We were amazed and felt that this was something completely unknown to our world. While we were discussing what to do with the find, a strange connection arose between us and this metal object. We felt a sudden anxiety and fear, as if something had taken over our minds. This was just the beginning of our immersion into the world of mysteries and mysteries associated with UFOs and their mysteries. We did not yet know what horrors awaited us ahead, and what the role of this small object would be in our destiny. The morning after our strange discovery, we continued to study the metal object, which seemed completely unusual. The object emitted a faint pulsating glow and continued to absorb our attention. We decided to conduct research to find out at least something about the origin of this object. While we were analyzing it, I felt that something was wrong. My thoughts were confused, and I experienced inexplicable anxiety. We consulted scientists and experts in the fields of astronomy and technology, but no one could give a clear answer to the question of the origin of this object. It was completely unlike anything mankind had ever known. We also learned that local authorities had become interested in our find and ordered us to return the object to them. But we could not agree with this. Our curiosity was stronger, and we were ready to do anything to reveal the secret of this illegal object. Time passed, and every day our anxiety only intensified. We began to notice that the equipment in our camp began to malfunction, and our dreams began to be filled with strange nightmares. We felt that our lives were under some threat. One evening, when we were returning to the place where our discovery was made, we discovered that the metal object had disappeared. Instead, strange footprints were left that resembled the paw prints of a bird, but were completely unusual. This was a turning point in our history, and we realized that something bigger and more powerful was involved in this mystery. We decided to continue our research, even if it meant facing unknown and dangerous forces. With each new step deeper into the mystery of UFOs and their mysteries, we plunged into greater horrors and dangers. Entities that came from the darkness and mysteries that remained unsolved became part of our lives. But there was no turning back for us, and we were ready to go to the end to solve this mystery and find out the truth about the world beyond our understanding. Ninth story. It was a cool morning in early October, and I decided to go to the fair to buy a pumpkin for the upcoming Halloween. I took my little brother, Mike, with me that day. We were much closer than many other brothers, and always found fun adventures to spend time together. The fair was a picturesque place, and this time provided a great opportunity to explore all things Halloween. Pumpkins, masks, costumes, carnival games, all this gave the event a special flavor. We got lost among dozens of pumpkins of different sizes and shapes until we found the perfect one for our future decor. The pumpkin was orange and irregularly shaped, exactly what we wanted. We bought it and headed to the house to start preparing for Halloween. But the closer we got to our house, the stranger things became. At first it was minor details, sounds like someone was watching us, and ugly shadows that seemed to be around us. Mike didn't notice and laughed at my ridiculous worries, but it seemed to me that something was wrong. I felt that something was haunting our pumpkin, as if it were a talisman of evil forces. When we got home, we started carving the face of our pumpkin, and I felt something watching us from the window. I looked around, but didn't see anything. It was probably my fantasy, I thought. When the pumpkin was ready and the candle was lit inside, it took on an even more sinister appearance. I felt that she was radiating magical power, which was intensifying every minute. Mike calmly played with buttons and a mask, not paying attention to my anxious feelings. He chuckled and asked me to calm down, but I couldn't get rid of the thought that our pumpkin was carrying something sinister and incomprehensible. It was at this moment, when I was trying to calm myself, that something strange happened. The light in the room began to flicker, and the walls began to bend as if they were alive. But the worst thing was that our pumpkin's eyes lit up, and she began to move on the table, as if she was trying to say something. I shouted to Mike, but before he even had time to turn around, the pumpkin flew into the air and flew through the window. We ran out into the street, but she was no longer there. Our pumpkin, as if it had come to life, disappeared into the night, and all we could do was quietly whisper its name and hope that it would never return. We stood on the threshold, confused and scared, but we felt that despite all the absurdity of what had happened, we could not ignore it. The pumpkin, which seemed to come to life and disappeared into the night, seemed to us like a mystery that needed to be solved. Mike, despite the fear that hung over us, offered to use his camera and leave it on at night to catch any sign of a returning pumpkin. I agreed, and we spent the night in anxious anticipation. The night passed without incident, and in the morning we discovered that the pumpkin had not returned. We reviewed the camera footage and saw her suddenly start moving and jump from the window. She seemed like an unassembled mass, as if she had acquired a consciousness of her own. We decided to talk to local residents and find out if anyone had similar strange events. We managed to find one man who told us a terrible story. He claimed that his pumpkin also came to life and disappeared, after which he began to experience strange nightmares and visions. We realized that this was no accident, and that our pumpkins carried some kind of sinister power with them. But which one exactly? Deciding to investigate the origins of these mysterious pumpkins, we went to the farmer who sold us ours. He told us about an ancient ritual that he inherited from his ancestors. It turned out that these pumpkins were grown using special seeds and that they had a connection with the spirits of the harvest. The deeper we delved into the history of this ritual, the darker its details became. The farmer told us about his own experiences and how his friends disappeared after they bought similar pumpkins. We realized that the pumpkins were somehow connected to the spirits of the harvest and that they brought with them something sinister and mystical. We had to uncover the secret of this ritual and try to destroy the connection between pumpkins and spirits before they brought even more trouble. Our adventure was just beginning, and we were ready to go to the end to solve the mystery of this terrible October story. 10th story. The summer was hot, and we decided to spend the weekend at the country house to get away from the bustle of the city. The country house, located on the outskirts of the forest, has always brought us peace and tranquility. She was a place where we could relax and enjoy nature. The first day went as expected. We sunbathed in the sun, swam in the lake, and cooked barbecue on an open fire. In the evening, we gathered around the fire, burning wood on it, and talking about unprecedented things. Everything seemed perfect. But the night came and things began to change. The first sign was strange noises in the forest. The wind died down, and we heard something like rustling bushes and footsteps. We joked that it was probably a bear or a moose, but the fear remained inside us. Soon after the noises in the forest died down, our fire began to flicker and smolder as if something was strangling it. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but decided not to scare the others or make a big deal out of it. But when I looked into the dark distances of the forest, my eyes caught on something sparkling. They were eyes, a pair of brilliant animal eyes that sparkled in the darkness. I couldn't see what it was, but something about them made me freeze. I got up and whispered to the others that we might not be alone in the country. They also saw the glowing eyes and began to worry. We decide to find out what it is, but stay safe. Taking flashlights and knives, we headed towards the forest. But when we approached the place where we saw the glowing eyes, we found nothing. No animals, no tracks. It was strange and scary. We returned to the fire, but fear remained with us. We spent the night in tension. Every rustle and creak caused us anxiety. And so, when it finally began to get light, we realized that we would never forget this night. What were those glowing eyes? And what could the forest around our country house be hiding? We had to investigate this mystery, but fear and bewilderment made our holiday less peaceful than we expected. The morning at the country house brought us some relief, but the fear from the night remained in our hearts. We began to discuss that mysterious night, and neither of us could find a reasonable explanation for those glowing eyes. Deciding that we needed more information, we decided to spend a day of exploration in the forest around the cottage. Taking a camera and some equipment with us, we set out in search of answers. While we were exploring the forest, nothing unusual happened. We photographed nature, picked wild berries, and enjoyed the peace of nature. But as we approached the place where we saw the glowing eyes, we began to feel a certain tension in the air. Finally, we reached the place where we saw those mysterious eyes. At first glance, nothing unusual was visible, but when we began to examine the ground and trees more closely, we noticed something strange. There were some symbols and signs engraved on the trees that looked like runes or ritual symbols. They were unfamiliar to us, but it seemed that they carried some mystical meaning. We decided to photograph these symbols and send them for examination to try to understand what they mean. This was the first step in revealing the mystery that shrouded our country house. Returning to the country house, we felt that our search had just begun. The symbols on the trees, the glowing eyes, and the fear that stayed with us. All this added up to a puzzle that we decided to solve. A difficult task awaited us, and we were ready to go to the end to find out what was hiding in the dark depths of our forest. 11th story. The past few weeks were like a nightmare for me that I could not survive. It all started with mysterious notes that I found in my mailbox. These notes were written in a handwriting unknown to me and contained threats that made my skin crawl. The first note came after a long day at work. I returned home tiredly and opened my mailbox, hoping to find bills and letters from friends. Instead, my eyes saw a strange piece of paper with a cryptic message. It sounded like an invitation to a world of nightmares. You will never know what happens next. At first I thought it was some kind of joke or mistake, but when the second note appeared, I began to get nervous. You are in danger, the message read. My anxiety increased, but I did not dare to contact the police. I wanted to believe that this was all just a joke. However, the third note convinced me that this was not a joke. You won't be able to leave anymore, she warned. My fear began to take over me, and I began to notice that I was being followed. In the shadows, at crossroads, in terrifying moments of loneliness, I felt their gaze. I decided to take action. He installed cameras around his house, but no suspicious people were visible on the recordings. Having almost lost hope, I finally decided to go to the police. They promised to start an investigation, but without concrete evidence, it was difficult to do anything. All this continued until I received the last note. I'm back, it said. This was the drop that overflowed the cup of my nerves. I decided to take on the investigation myself and began to analyze the notes, studying every word and every letter. And then I discovered something that made me freeze. All the notes were handwritten by my ex, who disappeared several years ago. All this time I thought he had left to start a new life, but in reality he was watching me in the shadows. Fate was cruel. I tried to forget about him, but he came back to remind me of his existence and past grievances. Now I knew that I would encounter him again. This was just the beginning of the nightmare that awaited me. My reaction to the fact that the person who wrote the notes was my ex was a mixture of shock, anger, and fear. All these years I thought he was gone from my life, and never expected to meet him again. We did not part on the best terms, and I felt that this past was left behind. Now that I realized that he was back and watching me, I became worried. I began to remember our conflicts, verbal arguments, and breakups. Maybe he was offended and decided to take revenge. However, as I studied his notes more closely, I realized that something about this situation did not add up. The handwriting on the notes was definitely his, but the style and content of the messages were too strange to be the result of his long-term pent-up anger. I started researching his past and actions after we broke up. Unexpectedly, I found out that he also received similar notes and felt persecuted. He insisted that he had never sent me any threats and was just as confused as I was. This information confused the cards, and I realized that there was a much more complicated story before me. Someone else was also involved in this, and perhaps they were trying to tease us with each other with our notes. My ex and I decided to join forces and solve this mystery together. We contacted the police and provided them with all available information. At first they were skeptical, but as more details were revealed, they began to realize that they had a serious problem. Now we are working together to find who is behind these notes and what he wants to achieve by scaring us. The mystery, which began with threats in the mailbox, turned out to be much more complex and mysterious than it initially seemed. We have to unravel the tangle of threads to find out the true nature of this mystery and find a way to end this nightmare once and for all. 12th story. I've always been told, don't say hello to strangers. But what happened that day left a bitter mark on my soul that I cannot forget. It was a cool autumn evening, and I was walking home after a long day at work. The streets were empty, and the wind blew leaves along the sidewalk. I was tired and dreamed of only one thing: to return home as quickly as possible and relax. But on the way to my house, I met a stranger. He was dressed strangely and looked a little ridiculous. His clothes seemed old and torn, and his hair was tangled and unkempt. There was nothing unusual on his face, but something in his gaze was strange, frightening. As he approached me, he smiled and said, "Hi, I'm lost. Could you show me the way to the nearest bus stop?" At first glance, this seemed like a normal request from a stranger, and I was about to answer, but something stopped me. Suddenly, a strange feeling came over me, as if something was wrong. I decided to trust my instinct and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't help it." And I hurried on, leaving him on the street. As I looked over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following me, I saw his smile disappear and his gaze become more intense. I felt that he was watching me, and it scared me. I quickened my pace and reached home, but the feeling of unease did not leave me. I told my family about this encounter, and they strongly warned me to be wary of strangers and to be more vigilant. Several weeks have passed since then, and nothing unusual has happened. But I still can't forget that moment when I trusted my instinct and didn't approach a stranger. What could have happened if I had gone with him? This question torments me every day, and I understand that don't say hello to strangers is a rule that should always be remembered. Weeks passed, and my meeting with that stranger seemed like a long-forgotten story. I returned to my daily routine and forgot about that unusual encounter. But one day, returning from work, I felt that someone was watching me again. My gaze shifted to the stranger who was standing on the opposite side of the street. He looked exactly the same as when we first met, dressed strangely and with the same incomprehensible smile on his face. My heart rate increased and I felt trembling. This meeting was too strange to be considered accidental. The stranger did not move. He just stood and looked at me. I resolutely moved on, but the feeling of unease did not leave me. From that moment on, I began to notice him whenever I left the house. He seemed like a prize,